Yeah. This game.
Release containment field.
Sequence initiated.
You're pathetic, Guardian. You really think you can...
This was the show in the 90s. Also notice that a lot of this shit was made just for this game. These are not scenes in the actual show. So the fact they made completely new shit just for this, and it's quite dark, really is pretty awesome until you actually start playing the game.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. System corrupted. System corrupted.
Deadly.
So, for those of you that don't know, ReBoot, if you never watched this, I'm sorry, but ReBoot was a fucking amazing show back in the 90s, and it was the first fully computer animated television show. On top of that, a show they did that a lot of you may know even better was Beast Wars, Transformers, which a lot of people loved, myself also. But ReBoot, though, was a really, really big show back in the 90s because it was right at the advent of, you know, computers being like a really big thing. And people were like, wow, this is like, you know, what goes on in a computer. And I'm sure some people probably actually believed that this is what went on in a computer. But the whole plot of the show was that Bob, the blue guy there, is a guardian of mainframe, which was basically the computer that you were in. The computer of the person in the show. And you never see the human who actually owns the computer where all this shit takes place. But when a user, the human, would play a game, it would be like a big fucking cube would drop down on mainframe because that was supposed to represent back in the day how people use floppy disks, because this is before CDs were invented and widely used. And so the big cube would drop down, and then Bob would have to go into it, and he'd have to play the game, and he'd have to beat the user. In a really morbid twist on what happens when you play games, and I'm sure something that made a lot of people feel very bad about playing video games, even a little back in the 90s, me included, was that if the user won the game, all of the sprites, aka the citizens of mainframe, would be essentially reduced to brain-dead slugs, including the Guardian, Bob, if you were in there. So, yeah. So that was kind of morbid and not at all what happens when you play a game, but basically that was there for drama. So Bob would have to go and win the game and save all the citizens that had the fucking cube land on them. The show, though, was just like a gag reel type thing, and then when it became about a year or so old, they started putting more and more darker plot lines into it, and then at the end of about a year and a half or so, they had a really, really dark episode where, like, Bob gets sent off and stuff like that, and Enzo, his, like, sidekick, you know, it's like little brother stereotype, had to basically defend mainframe in his place. And Enzo was doing a fine job of this until one of the darkest episodes in TV history happened, and fucking Enzo got fucked up. And so they basically had to do this whole time skip thing, and he becomes this like badass like Terminator type guy, and he goes all around the galaxy basically like Sliders and tries to come back, the computer galaxy, which they had like the internet in that being like some horrible place full of like tentacle monsters and like all these like, you know, Cthulhu-like beasts, which basically is a good representation of how the internet is today. And if you got in it, you're basically fucked. And then he eventually ends up back in mainframe, and it's all fucked up, and it's all really bad. And he has one big fight, and the whole system gets restored through a reboot, and everybody's happy. But anyways, and the title of the show references that when they go into a game, Bob fucking taps his little thing like a Star Trek, icon, and he reboots into whatever character is relevant for that game. So basically, Bob was like the boss character of any video game you played as a kid. So he's a complete asshole. But anyways, the show ended on a really bizarre cliffhanger, and I think that's because they were focusing really on Beast Wars, and then it just stopped. Well, for whatever reason, they either got funding or they just, whatever, said fuck it. They're going to apparently release a remake of this in 2014 with today's computer graphics, and nobody knows if it's going to just be flat out new characters, new situations, same plot, like same ideas, or if it's going to be a remake of the original series down to the core, or if it's going to be the same characters but new situations. Nobody knows. But either way, this was basically addicting as fuck to watch as a kid, and I just took up like 4 minutes of monologue of that, but that is what nostalgia does for you. And this was right on at the same time as a bunch of other ABC shows, which is where this was at, which was like the station when you were a kid for actual like neat cartoons. They even had Bump on the Night on there, for those of you that remember that claymation show. They had that, and they had Fudge, for those of you who remember those books. I actually watched that show a few times. They had fucking Free Willy as a show, for fuck's sake.